For decades, Pastor Creflo Dollar stood as one of the most recognizable figures in modern American Christianity. To many, he was the polished voice of confidence, the preacher who spoke about faith, success, and abundance with the authority of someone who truly believed every word. His ministry reached far beyond the south side of Atlanta, stretching into homes across continents. His messages inspired millions, and his charisma made him a global religious personality. But behind the flawless public image, behind the calm voice and confident smile, something far more complicated had been unfolding. Over time, the same message that propelled him to fame would become the source of fierce debate, personal strain, and an unexpected confession that shook the foundations of his ministry. To understand how he arrived at that point, you have to go back to the beginning, long before the headlines, long before the jets and mega sanctuaries, back to where the story truly started. Humble roots in Georgia. Creflo Augustus Dollar Jr. was born on January 28, 1962, in College Park, Georgia. His upbringing was modest, traditional, and shaped by discipline and faith. His father served as a police officer, and his mother worked in the cafeteria at Kathleen Mitchell Elementary School, an environment that unknowingly would become a symbolic backdrop for his future. As a boy, Dollar didn't dream of leading a church. Ministry wasn't the plan. Football was. He hoped to build a career on the field, and that dream carried him into the early 1980s when he enrolled at West Georgia College. But life has a way of changing direction in unexpected ways. A serious injury cut short the athletic future he had envisioned. While recovering, he found himself drawn into student Bible studies, not out of deep spiritual pursuit at first, but more as a way to fill the quiet, empty hours that injury had created. Over time, something shifted. Dollar later described experiencing a spiritual awakening, a moment that redirected the entire course of his life. What began as casual participation slowly grew into something more intentional. Before long, he started hosting his own Bible study groups, small, simple gatherings that began multiplying faster than he ever imagined. Among those early attendees was a young woman named Taffy Bolton, who would eventually become his wife and one of the most influential partners in his ministry journey. In 1984, Dollar earned his degree in educational therapy and landed a job at the Bronner Psychiatric Institute. He worked with individuals facing learning challenges, work he was reportedly good at and found meaningful. But no matter how promising the career path looked, ministry kept pulling at him. 2 years later, in 1986, he made a decision that would shape the rest of his life. He stepped away from his professional career and founded World Changers Ministries Christian Center. And he didn't launch it in a grand building or a prestigious hall, he started it in the cafeteria of Kathleen Mitchell Elementary School, the same place his mother once served lunch to students and where he himself had been part of the first Black integration group. Only 8 people attended that first service. But something about Dollar's message, steady, simple, and confident, resonated with people who were looking for direction. Crowds grew quickly, and as attendance increased, so did his vision for what the ministry could become. What began in a school cafeteria would eventually evolve into one of the most recognizable megachurches in the United States. As World Changers grew, Dollar began refining the teachings that would ultimately make him a global name, the prosperity message. Throughout the late 1980s and early 1990s, he emphasized principles of faith, positive confession, and generous giving, especially tithing. He taught that these practices weren't just religious traditions, they were spiritual tools that could unlock abundance, financial success, and personal transformation. To families struggling under economic pressure, it sounded like hope. To people searching for a second chance, it felt like strategy and empowerment. Dollar's influence grew rapidly. In 1991, he renamed the ministry World Changers Church International, WCCI, reflecting the global reach he believed God had assigned to his mission. Radio broadcasts followed. Television broadcasts followed. And soon the program Changing Your World brought him into millions of households. By the mid-1990s, he was no longer just a pastor, he was a household name in Christian television. The construction of the World Dome, completed in 1995, became one of the most visible symbols of his rise. Seating over 8,000 people and costing nearly $20 million, Dollar celebrated it as a testament to what faith and giving could achieve. By the 2000s, WCCI was reporting tens of thousands of members and tens of millions of dollars in annual revenue. Branch ministries opened in major cities around the world. The vision kept expanding: 500 fellowship churches, media platforms, and international missions. But as the ministry grew, so did questions about its finances and the lifestyle of its leader. The prosperity and the pressure. Few pastors have lived under the spotlight quite like Creflo Dollar. His homes, vehicles, and travel choices became matters of public debate, amplified by critics of prosperity theology. While WCCI's base in College Park included families living on modest incomes, Dollar's own lifestyle reflected the material success he often attributed to faith. Reports highlighted several properties connected to him: a large multi-acre estate in Fayetteville, homes in the Northeast, and luxury vehicles that made headlines. His ministry operated private aircraft for years, long before the well-known jet controversy erupted. Supporters saw his lifestyle as proof that his message worked. Critics saw it as an example of a pastor living above the people he served. Questions about financial transparency intensified when watchdog organizations rated his ministry poorly for lack of disclosed audited statements. A U.S. Senate Finance Committee investigation into several high-profile televangelists, including Dollar, raised concerns about whether ministry resources were being used appropriately. Dollar maintained that the government had no right to audit his religious organization, and no charges were ever filed. Still, the public conversation around him was changing. The perception of invincibility surrounding him began to weaken. And soon, one of the most controversial moments in his career would bring national scrutiny to an entirely new level. The jet controversy that sparked a firestorm. In 2015, Dollar made headlines across the world when his ministry launched Project G650, a fundraising campaign aimed at purchasing a Gulfstream G650 jet valued at around $65 million. The request stunned even people who were familiar with his prosperity message. Dollar argued the plane was necessary for international ministry travel and insisted that commercial airlines didn't coordinate with the demanding schedule of global evangelism. He also claimed his previous aircraft had significant mechanical issues that made continued use unsafe. The fundraising campaign asked for contributions from supporters, which drew immediate criticism from national media outlets, other Christian leaders, and financial watchdogs. Aviation experts publicly questioned details about the plane's capabilities, particularly its cargo limits, which contradicted claims made by the ministry about humanitarian use. As backlash intensified, the fundraising site was taken down. But in a sermon soon after, Dollar defended the idea with bold certainty, saying that critics had no authority to limit his faith or the goals he believed God placed before him. Inside the sanctuary, the congregation applauded. Outside, the reaction was far more divided. The controversy revived questions about transparency, stewardship, and the relationship between faith and finances, questions that had followed Dollar for years. But his challenges were not only public. Some were far more personal. A family incident that sparked difficult conversations. In 2012, Dollar faced one of the most painful moments of his public life when he was arrested following an incident involving one of his daughters. According to the police report, an argument escalated, and his daughter accused him of physical aggression. Dollar denied the more serious allegations, saying he only restrained her after she struck him first. Police documented a minor mark on her neck, which he attributed to eczema. The incident exploded across media outlets nationwide. Dollar addressed the congregation shortly after, describing the situation as exaggerated and expressing confidence that the truth would prevail. His church responded with vocal support. The legal case was eventually resolved through a court-ordered program, and charges were dropped. But the event left lingering questions about the pressures of public life, the complexity of family relationships, and the gap between public persona and private reality. And yet, even that controversy wouldn't compare to what came next, a moment that shook not only his ministry but the core doctrine that built his platform. In June 2022, Creflo Dollar delivered a sermon that left many stunned. After decades of preaching that tithing was a biblical requirement and a key to unlocking financial blessing, he announced that he had changed his position. In a message titled The Great Misunderstanding, he said that Christians were under grace, not Old Testament law, and therefore giving should never be based on fear, obligation, or the belief that God required a strict 10% of income. He went so far as to tell his congregation to discard books and teachings he had previously produced on the subject. Supporters praised the honesty. Critics questioned the timing. Former members asked whether the millions donated under his earlier teachings would ever be addressed. Dollar offered no apology, saying his journey required him to teach what he understood at each stage of his spiritual development. But for many, the reversal raised more questions than it answered. It forced people to ask whether the prosperity message itself had been misinterpreted or misused. Creflo Dollar's shift on tithing didn't just surprise people, it shifted the ground beneath decades of teaching. For many longtime supporters, the announcement didn't erase their respect for him but introduced a new kind of uncertainty. If one of the core pillars of his financial doctrine could be reinterpreted after so many years, what did that mean about the rest of the prosperity framework? For others, especially critics, the change felt like long-awaited validation. The prosperity gospel had been debated for years, but Dollar was one of the most recognizable voices attached to it. His influence was enormous. His sermons defined the spiritual thinking of countless families around the world. So when he admitted that a major component of his earlier teaching had been based on a misunderstanding, it reignited conversations that had simmered for years. Theologians revisited past arguments. Economists and religious scholars discussed the impact of prosperity teachings on low-income congregations. Former church members shared their personal experiences, some positive, some painful. But regardless of where people stood, one thing was clear: the confession changed the narrative surrounding Creflo Dollar. He had built his ministry teaching biblical certainty. He had built his empire on the foundation of divine guarantees. And now, he was publicly acknowledging that one of those guarantees was never meant to be absolute. The shift was not just theological. It was deeply personal, and it raised a new question. What responsibility does a leader have when a foundational teaching changes? The burden of influence. The thing about influence is that it works in two directions. It can elevate someone to a level few ever reach. But it can also magnify every mistake, misinterpretation, and misstep. For years, Dollar had been held up as an example of the prosperity message in action. His life was often used to demonstrate what faith could supposedly produce. His cars, his homes, his travel, they weren't presented as luxuries but as visual proof of spiritual principles. And that message resonated with people who felt stuck, overlooked, or financially discouraged. Hope is a powerful motivator, especially when wrapped in spiritual language and delivered by a confident leader. But critics argued that the prosperity message, especially in its more extreme forms, could place overwhelming pressure on followers, especially those already struggling. If someone tithed faithfully but didn't experience financial breakthrough, they questioned themselves. Did they lack faith? Were they disobedient? Were they not praying enough? Dollar's new interpretation of tithing raised those concerns again. If giving was never meant to be a requirement, how many people had sacrificed out of fear instead of faith? How many families stretched their budgets because they believed blessing depended on it? How many people misunderstood generosity as a transaction instead of a choice? Dollar did not directly address those questions in his sermon. And that silence sparked emotional reactions from multiple sides. Some defended him, saying spiritual understanding evolves over time and that leaders grow just like anyone else. Others believed that someone with a platform as large as his had a responsibility to address the past more directly. But whether people praised him or questioned him, the shift revealed something important. The prosperity gospel was facing scrutiny like never before, and Dollar was at the center of the conversation. A ministry at a crossroads. Following the tithing announcement, Dollar continued preaching and leading World Changers Church International. But the tone of his ministry began to subtly shift. Where earlier messages leaned heavily toward the promises of financial abundance, more recent sermons carried a different focus of grace, spiritual transformation, and personal understanding. He seemed less interested in presenting himself as a symbol of material success and more focused on internal growth. But the history of his ministry couldn't be erased. The aircraft controversies, the wealth questions, the Senate investigation, the family incident, all of these moments remained part of the larger narrative that shaped public perception. Dollar's journey had become an example of the complexity of religious leadership in the modern age. With fame comes visibility. With visibility comes scrutiny. And with scrutiny comes moments that test a leader's humility, honesty, and direction. The turning point on tithing placed Dollar in a rare position. Almost no influential prosperity preacher had ever publicly retracted or revised such a significant teaching. It forced both supporters and critics to reassess how they viewed not only him, but the entire movement he represented. But for Dollar personally, the shift may have signaled something deeper, an internal reckoning that had been building for years. A quiet confrontation with the weight of decades of influence, decisions, and teachings. A moment where the man behind the microphone had to step back and ask himself what all of it meant. The humanity behind the headlines. It's easy to see someone like Creflo Dollar through the lens of headlines alone, financial debates, doctrinal disputes, public controversies. But behind every public figure is a human story filled with personal challenges, victories, regrets, and evolution. Dollar's journey, from a child in a modest Georgia home to the leader of an international ministry, was never simple. His rise was shaped by ambition, charisma, and a message that resonated deeply with people seeking hope. His setbacks were shaped by human imperfections, misunderstandings, and decisions made under immense pressure. Whether someone views him as a flawed leader, a misunderstood figure, or a man doing his best with the knowledge he had at each stage, one thing is undeniable. Creflo Dollar's story is far. His ministry continues. His influence continues. And his evolution as a pastor, as a leader, and as a person, continues. What comes next may determine how future generations remember him. But today, his journey serves as a powerful reminder of how complicated, beautiful, and unpredictable spiritual leadership can be.